Welcome back. This is Jennifer McGuire. I'm glad you're joining me today. People often ask what inspires me to create, and oftentimes I say it's the product itself. Just like you, I get really giddy when I see a new product that I really like, and I can't wait to dive in. And today's Simon Says Stamp STAMPtember collaboration with Hero Arts is a good example of that. When I saw this stamp set, I knew I needed to put it to good use because it has such a unique style and is nothing like I have in my craft room. Well, I decided to use this stamp set and the coordinating dies to do a stepped up, clean and simple card technique. So this is almost a one-layer card, but it has lots of interest to it thanks to creating windows with the coordinating dies. I will be doing 2 different card designs and doing 3 of each to demonstrate that you can do batch creating with this technique. Keep in mind you can do this technique with any stamps and coordinating dies you may have. And keep in mind also that you can either step this up or simplify it based on what you're looking for. Let's get started with this first example. This is the stamp set that is a collaboration between Hero Arts and Simon Says Stamp for STAMPtember 2025. The stamp set is called Snowy and Bright, and there are coordinating dies available. I love the unique style of this right off the bat. You have some solid images for like background, and then you have this really fine line outline images and sentiments. Very unique style, different than anything I have, and I hope they come out with more like this in the future. I also have my MISTI stamping tool and a side folding 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. I do recommend making this out of a heavyweight cardstock because it is the core of what we're creating. We're not going to do many layers onto it. Now I did stamp and die cut out some pieces of mountains and trees and such from that stamp set so that I could kind of plan what I was going to do. So these mountains won't actually get glued here. I'm just laying them out, kind of figuring out configuration I want. Then I'm laying on top of that 2 of the mountain stamps, just the bottom bases of the 2 mountains. Then I'll close the door on my stamping tool and remove those die cuts. Again, I was just using those to get a positioning. I will ink up these mountains with Misty Coast from Pinkfresh Studios. I just went through my ink collection and looked for 2 shades of gray. This is the darker of the 2. I went super, super light. I end up changing the colors of this later on, but for now, I'm using Misty Coast. I stamped that on the front of the note card. Then I opened up the note card and I'm stamping it the same thing on the inside. So it'll be in the exact same position on the front of our card and on the inside of our card. And I will do this with 3 card bases. Now I could keep going and do many more, but I chose to do 3 today. So I put it in the corner of my Misty, stamp with the Misty Coast ink, open it up and stamp again. Again, this will give us those mountains in the exact same place on the front of our card and the inside of our card. That is really important for today's technique. And again, here I'm doing it with the 3rd card. By the way, I chose colors today that are a little bit unique, a little bit muted for the holidays, but you could go bright and more realistic if you prefer to. All right, now it is time to close one of the cards and line up the 3rd mountain that I'm going to do. And I'm going to have it overlap that mountain on the right. So we'll do a little masking, but you'll see it's really easy to do. I really could just stamp on top, but you would see that overlap. So I'm just putting a Post-it note over the side of that mountain we've already stamped, and I'll stamp the other on top of it. Then I'll take that Post-it note off and move it to the inside and do the same thing again. It's amazing how you can get into a rhythm with this. The things that take the most time with this card design is coming up with the design itself. So if you made a lot of these, you would save quite a bit of time because once it's set up, you're good to go and it becomes very quick. But I did do the exact same thing on all 3 card bases. Now I can add the mountain tops, and for this, I'm using an even lighter gray. This is Lawn Fawn Jellyfish. Now you'll notice that I only have 2 mountains and 2 mountain tops in that stamp set. If I wanted to save time, I could have just done 2 mountains on my card design, but I really wanted 3, so I do have to go through and do that extra step to get that extra mountain. But I think it's worth it in the end. Now there are many things you could do to step this up. You could use maybe a clear sparkle embossing powder for the snow on the top. You could use that puffy paint for the paint pen for the snow so that it has dimension. But again, I'm going for kind of quirky muted colors today. So I'm using gray for the mountain and the mountaintop. So I continue to do this for all 3 card bases, and you end up with the mountains on the front and the inside of the card in the exact same position. Next, it's time to figure out where my trees will go. Now, I have, again, stamped and die cut little trees just to figure out my positioning. So all of these pieces are just laying here. I'm not using glue. Just wanted to find where to put them. You could definitely simplify this by not doing the trees or by using less trees, but I was determined to have 5 trees around my 3 mountains. So once I figured out the positioning, I decided to take a picture of it this time. That's the positioning I want on my final card. So I'm taking my small tree stamp and my bigger tree stamp and putting them in 2 of those spots. And then I'll move all my die cuts out of the way and I will go ahead and stamp these. For this set of trees, I'll be using Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink in the Cabbage color. One of the things I really like about this ink is that you can stamp it multiple times on top of each other and the color gets darker, but it doesn't get like fuzzy edged. Some dye inks, when you stamp multiple times on top of each other, it bleeds a little bit and you kind of get a fuzzy edge to your stamped image. But I found with this Positively Saturated ink from Simon Says Stamp, you can stamp multiple times and you still get a crisp image. It gets darker. So it gives you a lot of different shades in one ink pad. So you could stamp it once or twice and get a light color. You can stamp it 3 or 4 times on top of each other and get a medium, and you can keep building it up to get whatever shade you want. So I did 2 or 3 stamps with this particular card design. And notice once again, I'm stamping the trees on the front of the card and the inside of the card. And thanks to the Misty stamping tool, they'll be stamped in the exact same position. And I'll do that to all 3 cards. Now it's time for more trees. Now this one I want to look like it's behind the smaller tree. This is a minor little detail. You could skip this if you want to, but you'll see it's easy. I need to mask off this little green tree I've already stamped. Instead of stamping and cutting a tiny little mask, I'm actually just using the die cut. And I'm setting it over the little tree, but setting it off to the left a little bit. So basically the right edge of that die cut lines up with the right edge of the stamp tree underneath. It's not a perfect mask, but it works just fine. I just have some tape on the left side of that tree so I can easily pick it up when I'm done, put it in the next position, and stamp the tree again. By the way, this green color is Artichoke from Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink line. It's a great green color. Also, it may not make a whole lot of sense right now, but you don't need to worry about doing masking on the front of the card. You only need to do that on the inside. The front will get die cut out in a moment, but you'll see that. So at this point, I have 3 mountains and 3 trees, and I will stop here and do my die cutting. All of those images will end up being windows on the front of our cards, showing through to the stamping on the inside. That's the really cool part of this technique. It's taking a clean and simple card and stepping it up by creating windows for some of the stamped images. And it allows us to have a scene on the front of our card and a scene on the inside that's slightly different. All right, now let's cut those windows. I'm opening up my card and laying it onto my cutting plate. I like to position it so that the fold line or the crease of my card lines up with the edge of my cutting plate. That just prevents any kind of lines from being pressed into the back side of the card. I'll take a few of the coordinating dies and line it up with the stamped images. I like to use Easy C tape. It comes in a few different colors because that never tears my cardstock. Sometimes it leaves a little residue behind, but not always, but I'll tell you how to tackle that in a moment. So I'm placing down 2 mountain bottoms, 1 tree, and 1 mountain top. That's pretty much how many things I can run through on the first pass without overlapping my dies. Then I'll put the top cutting plate on, run it through my die cut machine. You can do this with any die cut machine you have. Today I'm using my Empress Elite. All right, now these mountains and trees that I'm cutting out, I can save for another card. But I'm just using the windows of the card front today. Let's do another pass through the die cut machine. I'm lining up my card on my cutting plate so that creases along the edge of the cutting plate. And this time I'm cutting 1 large tree and 2 mountain tops. Then we'll run that through our die cut machine. And on the 3rd pass, I'll do a large tree and a mountain bottom. And that will end up cutting out all of the images on the front of our card, which will line up with the inside. Again, you could simplify this so you only have to do 1 or 2 passes through the die cut machine to create these windows. But I really wanted to have that full scene on the front of the card and on the inside. So now I have windows on the front of our card that show through to the mountains and the trees stamped on the inside. And it just creates for unique card design. Now, if the temporary tape that you use to hold your dies in place leaves a little residue behind, I recommend having an adhesive eraser that will quickly remove that residue and you'll be as good as new. And of course, I will repeat the same process for all 3 of those card bases. After we've completed that, it's time to add more images to the card front. So I'm putting one of my card bases back into my MISTI stamping tool. And again, I have my little die cuts that I can use to kind of get the positioning just right. I'm trying to figure out where I want the little pond for them to ice skate. So once I have those positioned, I will take my pond image, line it on top of the die cut, close the door on my stamping tool, grab that stamp, and then I'm ready to stamp it directly onto the front of my card. I could just glue die cuts onto it, but I want to have different layers of depth to this. We have our die cut windows that show the trees and the mountains in the background. And then we'll have this little pond stamped directly on the front of the card. Then we'll have die cut people sticking out on the front of the card. So it's just about building layers, but not dimension or not too much dimension that would be bulky in the mail. So I'm stamping the pond on the front of all 3 cards using Hero Art's Mist ink. It's the perfect light pool color. Now it's time to come in with some details to the pond. For this, I am stamping with Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink in the Dew color. It is a beautiful color, and it just adds a little bit of interest to that pond image. Now looking at our card, you can see some of these images are die cut and glued on the front of the card, just adding to the different layers. Let's create those next. I stamped a bunch of images here with black ink on white cardstock, and I'm using the coordinating dies to cut them all out at once. Now I don't end up using all of these images on these 3 cards, but I do have them ready to go and save for later. I figure since I have the room on my cardstock, I might as well stamp as many images as I can and die cut them all in the same pass, and I'll have them saved for later. Once I stamped and die cut 3 of each image, it's time to color them. I did simple coloring on all of the card. First of all, I used a brown Copic marker to draw the trunks on the tree. I just basically did a little dot at the bottom of the trees. I thought it was faster than using the tree stump that's included in the stamp set. And then I did basic coloring of my images. I did not do any shading or any kind of special coloring to this. These are small images with really fine detail lines, so I thought it would be just really quick and easy to do basic coloring, and it works in the end. But you could definitely do shading if you prefer. But honestly, for this card design, I think you could leave those images uncolored and it still would look great. All right, once I have all those colored, it's time to add them to our card. I'm first using just some tape runner to add the skaters and the different pieces to the front of the card to make sure I get the design just right. So I get the elements positioned exactly where I want it. Once I'm happy with the position, I will go back and add a little liquid adhesive behind the images. And I will be able to use liquid adhesive for the other 2 cards because I'll just follow whatever design I came up with this one. I did use some of the leftover trees that I die cut, and I'm adding those into the background also. So I end up with 5 trees in total. 3 are cut out as windows that we did earlier, and then 2 are die cut and glued onto the background. Now it's time to decorate something on the inside. So we have the scene with the couple on the front. Now we need to add a little doggy to the inside or a snowman. On a couple of the cards I did a dog, on one I did a snowman. It's up to you. Now we need a sentiment on the front of the card and the inside. So I really like the sentiment that says, "May your days be snowy and bright." I thought that was fun and unique, and I stamped that onto the front on all 3 cards with black ink. I then opened up the card and I stamped "Wishing you joy" on the inside. And I stamped this as high as I could so that I would have plenty of room to write a personal message below. Next, I took an image from the stamp set that is a cluster of little dots, and I stamped that on 3 places on the front of the card and 3 places on the inside of the card. And I used Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated ink in the Seafoam color. This is very subtle, very close to the mist color I used for the pond, but I thought it added a little bit of interest. Last but not least, you can add any details you want. I used an old glitter pen to add some sparkle to the pond, but you could do lots of things here. You could spray the whole card with some glitter dust. You could add little gems. You could add sequins, but I really wanted to keep this a card that didn't have much bulk and had a little bit of sparkle. So let's look at our 3 completed cards. I did choose matching envelopes for each. I always like to do matching envelopes. I think it's a great finishing touch, but especially with clean and simple designs. Now you'll notice I have 3 layers of depth to this. We have the die cut windows, which have the trees and the mountains on the inside. Then we have the stamping that's directly on the front of the card. Then we have the stamping that's die cut and glued onto the front of the card. So you have lots of depth without too much bulk or dimension. And you have a different scene on the front and inside of the card, making the card extra special. All right, let's do another set of cards. I feel like the best way to understand a technique is to see it multiple times, so here we go. On this one, we only have 3 die-cut tree windows on the front of the card, but a fun little scene that continues on to the inside. So I have 3 more white note cards that are 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. On the front of these note cards, I'm stamping 2 trees that I've already positioned. I kind of planned out my card on the side, so I knew where I wanted each thing placed. I'm stamping these 2 trees in artichoke ink on the front of the card and the inside of the card. You can see how having a stamp positioner like the Misty is very beneficial. I then will stamp additional trees onto the front of the card and the inside using the same ink colors. I will then move the trees to a 3rd position and I'll stamp these with the lighter cabbage color. Now I'm only showing 1 of this card this time around, but do know I'm repeating the process on 2 more so that I'll have 3 completed cards in the end. But remember, you could do 10 completed cards and it wouldn't take much more time because once you have your stamps set up, it is quick to do additional cards. Now I'm not going to do my die cut windows just yet. Instead, I'll stamp my sentiment and the sled that our little dog will be going down the hill on, and I'm stamping these with black ink. The reason I'm doing these now is I'm not sure if I want more trees at this point. So by stopping and stamping these, I can kind of get an idea if I need more windows. I felt like I was good with what I had, so I'll go ahead and do the die cutting of the windows. So I have my little tree die and my big tree die. I'll tape those in place, run it through my die cut machine, making sure the fold line of my card lines up with the edge of the cutting plate so I don't get any harsh lines on the back of my card. Now these trees we just die cut out, I'm going to save because I can glue them as layers on the front of the card in a moment. I do want to cut out 1 more tree and I'll cut that out on the top. So this card only has the 3 trees as die cut windows on the front of the card. The best thing about this technique is you can have as few or as many windows as you want, and all you need are stamps and coordinating dies. Now it's time to add the rest of the elements to the front of the card. I'll add a little die cut and stamped dog, and then some of those leftover trees that we have from the die cutting that we did. So I end up with 3 trees on the top, 2 trees on the side, and 3 on the bottom. Once again, instead of stamping tree trunks, I'm just using my brown Copic marker to draw little kind of dots at the bottom of the trees and then color in my dog. I can also color the rest of the images. Thankfully, there aren't many to color on this, so I could make lots of these cards. The reason I chose Copic markers is you don't get scribble lines with those, so I can do basic coloring and it'll look great. And then I also added a little snowman to the inside of each card. I thought it'd be fun to make it look like this dog is sledding down a hill, so I have my Simon Says Stamp 6-inch T-ruler and a glitter pen, and I'm drawing 2 little straight lines along where the dog would be going down the hill. It's kind of hard to see in the video, but in real life it shows up, and it really adds a lot of interest to the card. And then finally, I'm using the Seafoam ink again to add subtle little snowflakes falling in the background. So here are my 3 completed cards. I matched them up with red envelopes to make the sled of the dog pop out even more. You can see how this is a very clean and simple card design, but it's special because some of those trees are windows to show through to the scene on the inside. This takes a little more effort than a regular card, but it makes it extra special because of the 2 different scenes that you have. This is something that you can do with a lot of stamps and coordinating dies, and I encourage you to give it a try. So if you like to create a lot of holiday cards to send out that you can batch create without too much bulk, this is a technique to try. And remember, this can be done with any stamp set that you have coordinating dies to go with. But if you're interested in what I use today, I have it linked below in my YouTube description. At the end here, I'll link to a couple other videos that share similar techniques in case you're looking for more ideas. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you soon.